in the next cycle will be Qatari women, 60% female. And joining us now to talk a little bit about that and some of the impact the embargo has had there as we cover the Middle East and the Gulf is Dr. Dean Dennis. Dr. Dennis is the CEO of Northwestern University in Doha, Qatar. Dr. Dennis, great to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me on, John. I appreciate it.
I tell you what, I love what you guys are doing out there. It's one of the best. I'm trying to bring a light to it, Dr. Dennis, but having been there twice and just touring the campuses, I mean, it's one of the best kept secrets in the world, let alone the United States. As we go into and I'm going to get to your op-ed in a minute, but as we get into 2019, what are some of as you've been there for some time now, Dr. Dennis, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in education city and how things have evolved recently?
Well, John, the one that you touched on at the beginning is really the empowerment of women through education. This is very important, and in some schools it's 70%, others it's 40 or 50, and across fields like engineering and medicine and fine arts and diplomacy and journalism and communication. So, and these folks are graduating, going into the workforce in jobs that would have never been available or open to them 10 or 15 years ago. It's having a tremendous impact in business, in media, in government agencies. And then a lot of them go off to graduate school, the best graduate schools in the world, Europe and North America, and many come back. Now, about half of our students are from places other than Qatar. And that's
right.
A good thing, too, because it's a real very international and diverse school. So you meet people from almost every part of the world, and that's great for everybody. It's great for the Qataris too, because it makes them much less parochial.
And so, as you look forward, I mean, I'm a fan of Virginia Commonwealth University.
Sure.
I follow the Rams basketball team and their School of Arts. I visited that. And then to see so many people taking up these different disciplines, because you've got, for our listeners that don't know, in education city in Doha, Qatar, there's 6 U.S. university, 1 British and
right.
1 French, and these are Virginia
That's
Commonwealth, right. which is, of course, based in Richmond. Mm-hmm. There is Cornell Medicine, Texas A&M University, Carnegie Mellon,
Yep.
Georgetown, as everybody knows that, in
mm-hmm.
Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. your university, Northwestern, and then there's I think, is HEC Paris still there?
Yes, HEC Paris, one of the great business schools of the world, is here with EMBA programs, and then also there's University College London, which does heritage studies, librarianship, and some various areas of research. So it's really almost an academic common market, as you suggested. A student can take courses across all these schools. And one thing where there's very little diplomatic relations in the United States is between and among universities. Hopping from one school to another just isn't very easy. In Education City, it is. A student they don't have to get permission to go. They just go register for a course, and all the universities count the other universities' work equally. So that's a huge breakthrough, and it's made this thing work. And it's been great to see the advances in coverage, in media coverage in the region, driven to some extent by the folks who are coming out of these schools. Just more the talent pool of the country is increased by this, and I think it's changing attitudes and values in many ways. And of course, the schools do a good job, I think, both representing the best of American education on the one hand, but also being conscious of local traditions and issues and trying to work through some of those as well. And we, in our school in particular, while we're a media and communications school, but kind of based in the liberal arts, we are very interested in independent media and freedom of expression. And that, of course, as you know, is incrementally changing. It changes a little bit forward here and backward there. But we're seeing, trend lines there that are very good. And we do studies every year at our school across the whole region, 7,000 subjects, how they use the media, from social media to radio and television and magazines and books and the rest, and movies, and see what those changing patterns are and how that relates to what people's attitude is toward government, toward censorship and regulation and those kinds of issues. And it's profoundly impressive to see these changes over time. And we started our work during the Arab Spring, and while many people think the Arab Spring was a great failure, in many ways it was. There's a lot of residue of the Arab Spring, which you find in social media. There's a lot more going on than many people would realize.
Would you elaborate on some of that? We're with Dr. Dean Dennis. He is the Chief Operating Officer of the Northwestern School of Communications and Journalism out of Doha, Qatar, and Education City. Dr. Dennis, can you elaborate a little bit about that, what you said, the changes since the Arab Spring?
Sure. Well, at first, during the Arab Spring, as you know, there were these revolutions across the whole region. The thought was that sitting governments would all be overthrown and there'd be some kind of great democratic movement across it. That didn't really happen. In some places there were changes, but the role that media played in that was, profound. The social media set off some of these things. It was a gathering place for people in the street. It informed the international media as they came in. And then, of course, as we know, there were failed states that came out of this. But people, as a result of that and other things that happened, began to read more widely, be on the Internet more. The Internet in penetration in Qatar and the UAE, for example, is the highest in the world, 99%. It's less so as you go across the Middle East and African continent to Egypt, where it's 30 to 40%. But that's changing. So people are online. They are using smartphones. They're doing all kinds of things. They're looking at their own media, and there's been all kinds of new programming that's developed, but also very conscious of Western media, particularly that from the U.S., some from Europe, and of course we get media from India and other places in the region too. So that's been good, and it's just been nothing's perfect and it doesn't change instantly and overnight. It's had an impact on people relating to each other, commenting on services, attitudes toward criticism of government, which were almost verboten in the past, have loosened up enormously. And this is something that ultimately I think will have some impact across the whole region, country by country. But it's a very exciting development. Another thing that's happened as a result of this, and the blockade of Qatar has particularly affected this little country. But it's a country, as you know, from being here, has a large American influence. Is the largest American military base in the Middle East is here with American universities, a lot of business activity, and that's been something that's I think a very good development, and it's given the U.S. a real footprint here and a very positive one in terms of collaborating with the country, working together with people, and we're all here invited. And we're not invaders, and we didn't come barging in here. We were invited, and we're guests, but we're respected guests, I think, and partners in all of this. So I think that's been good. One thing that's happened that I think is very good, as you know, one of the hallmarks of free society is to be able to criticize and to do so without fear of prison sentences, et cetera. And until very recently, libel was criminalized in Qatar, and it is in most of the Middle East. That is, if you libel someone, you defame someone, or you criticize the government, you can go to jail. Now that's changed, and it radically changed to be, as it is in the U.S., a civil tort, and one where there's a fine or there are damages in court, as opposed to the jail sentence. And that's it seems arcane in some ways, but it's a huge development for freedom of expression.
Dr. Dennis, the blockade, which is now going into it's going to be 2 years old now, or
yes, it is. Yeah,
2 years old. And I've covered this ad nauseum since it's happened, and we know that economically the Qatari people and the Qatari government have overcome it. Many observers like me think the country of Qatar is actually better off since the blockade economically because they expanded their trade routes, they expanded their economic trade systems. They become food self-sufficient, things that they simply had to do, and so they're better off. Their GDP's higher today than it was before the blockade. But a lot of people are saying, including yourself, Dr. Dennis, that the blockade has also had a tremendous impact on just basic freedom of speech in Qatar, and it's outpacing anybody else in the region. Can you explain that?
Well, I think the first thing after the blockade, it gave the country itself a lot of resilience. As you know, this is a country of about 2.5 million people, and only 300,000 are Qatari citizens. Right. And it's brought people together in a way that's quite amazing, and it's led to the government loosening up on things that were questionable before. They were less likely to allow religious freedom in terms of other faiths besides the Muslim faith coming in here. That's changed. There's been much more openness about that, and also the fact that things that weren't heretofore were verboten to be published get published. And so it's really why it happened. I think is Qatar saw itself as being distinctively different from some of the other countries in the region, which were known to be quite the opposite on controlling speech and information. And I think they saw this as a chance to distinguish themselves on the world stage. And if you want to be a modern player, and if you really want to be a modern player, this is the way you go. You don't, go back into medieval practices. And I think that's been the factor. Also, the World Cup coming to Qatar in 2022, the country simply has to be ready for it.
Right.
And to be able to accommodate the world press and the sports media, because as you know, they don't come here to any country that has an Olympic Games or a World Cup. They don't come to bring Valentine's. They write critical pieces about everything.
Right.
And Qatar needs to be ready for that, and I think they are. Now, there's still pockets of repression in some ways. Some of the press laws are not the best. There are still movies that are censored, not in Education City, but elsewhere in the country. And so freedom of expression to me is always in play. And you really always have to be on your game and aware of what you're seeing. And training and educating students, we really push this line in terms of not just American values, but we think are really universal values about freedom of information that are really very important. And I think picking up support in a place that you would not necessarily have expected it before.
There's always reactions to certain things. And the consequences of the blockade, nobody would have ever seen any of this coming. The elevation in free speech, the liberation of Qatari women for two things, the economic resurgence the country has had by expanding its ability to get goods and services from others, and also inspire their own industry. And I think I visited one farm there, and kind of interesting, they had gone from importing 90% of their dairy products from Saudi Arabia to, I think at the end of they were saying at the end of 2019, only 5% of their dairy products would be imported anywhere. And by 2020, they would actually start, they would be a net exporter of dairy products.
I suppose you saw some of the cows they flew in from Wisconsin and California and Washington State.
Yes.
It's quite amazing. 4,000 milking cows have come to Qatar, so it's remarkable things happen. Sports played a big role in this too, not just the World Cup, but recently in the Asian Games, where you see the dramatic contrast of the coverage in the UAE. In fact, when Qatar, which won the Asian Games football and soccer, as it's called here. They beat the UAE, and that was in Abu Dhabi, which didn't please the folks in the Emirates. And then they beat Japan, and the newspapers and the media across the UAE shamefully had headlines that said Japan loses Asian Games. They didn't say who won. I've never seen a sports story before that told you who the loser was,
but
didn't bother to mention the winner. and that shows the dramatic contrast with what's going on here, where there really is a pretty open coverage and not hostile coverage of these blockading nations, because someday they're going to get back together again. They're brothers under the sun, and there's no reason they should be having this rather ridiculous siege that goes on and keeps people from flying where they want to go and breaks families apart and is bad for all parties. But as you say, Qatar has come out of it pretty well.
Really dumb, because the objectives that the 4 blockading countries had, just to remind our listeners, the Gang of Four, Bahrain, the United Emirates, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
Trying to did this blockade. The whole thing has failed, and it's just time for them to make a deal and get rid of it. We're with CEO of Northwestern University, based in Doha, Qatar, Dr. Dean Dennis. Dr. Dennis, I always have to ask this question to the various heads of colleges that come on. How tough is it for you to recruit professors from the U.S. To come for a period of time to Doha in Education City, whether it's Northwestern or your counterpart at Georgetown or Virginia Commonwealth, Texas A&M? How tough is that?
Well, John, it used to be very hard, because you would say to someone in Virginia or New York or California, would you like to come and live in the Middle East? And they'd say, are you crazy? And then they'd come over and they'd see, first we have these massive physical plants, some of the best facilities in the world in all of our schools, as you know, and resources to work with, and a great challenge to help educate folks in a part of the world that have not had this kind of education before. And we don't have any trouble now. We have some searches going on. In fact, we keep getting new positions for digital media and other topics, and we'll get anywhere from sometimes up 300 or so applicants for positions, and they're good applicants from various places, both from the U.S., from Europe. We're getting a lot of applications from England now. Brexit has had an impact, sadly, on education. There are people wanting to get out. But it's not a problem. And young families come here because they're great resources for kids. And it's a safe place. It's the second safest city in the world behind Singapore, I think. Right. And it's just, you can live well here. Now, truth to tell, it's very hot in the summer. Many people freeze in the summer because the temperatures get very severe. Although it's got the best air conditioning system in the world, and get cold in the summer sometimes because people would hover in the sanctum of big malls and places like that. But it's not difficult, and also the students. One of the things we're very proud of, our students go off to some of the best graduate schools in the world, which is the real test of our education any good. When they're out on the open market, other places, they don't have to take them, and they take them gladly, and they perform well. It's a great thing, and it's part of really building institutions that will have an impact on people for generations to come. I mean, it's happened pretty fast, but some things also take time, and it's gratifying to be part of this. It's a great it's the adventure of a lifetime for any of us who are here, and I encourage you to come back and come see our school and come to the classes and see what students are doing. You'd be really quite fascinated.
Yes, I am. I am going to come back. I've visited several of the other schools, but I do have to come to Northwestern. Maybe I can give a lecture on media in the U.S. When I'm out there. We'll stay in touch on that. I'd love to be able to do that. Dr. Dennis, thanks for being with us, and thanks for all you do for Northwestern University, one of the greatest schools on the face of the earth in journalism and communications. And, of course, myself being in the journalism business, when you think of Northwestern, you think of top of the line. Dr. Dennis, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and come back and see us.
I will. CEO of Northwestern University in Doha, Qatar, and that is Dr. Dean Dennis. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network.